Welcome to the Light Your Heart with Hope podcast. I'm Erin, and I'm so thankful you're here. My hope and prayer are that through listening to today's episode, God will encourage you and do immeasurably more than all you can ask or imagine. We all have dreams of what we think life will be like. We hope and plan and do whatever we need to do in order to achieve our goals. But what if everything you had hoped and dreamed your life would be like doesn't happen? In fact, it's not even close to what you would have ever imagined. What if, regardless of your circumstances, you were able to see God's hand and His presence in your life? In today's message, Tammy shares her incredible journey with us about how God prepared her and helped her walk through a life journey she never would have imagined walking through. She encourages us to see God's hand at work in our lives, especially in the most devastating and heartbreaking circumstances.
So my life before marriage and becoming a mom was easier. I was a young 20-year-old. I grew up in poverty. So my goal was to get out of poverty and to be the CEO of this chain-like salon business, get my cosmetology license and my degree in business, and be this big hotshot. And then married my high school sweetheart, but none of that happened. I ended up being a beauty school dropout, not on purpose, but that's how things happened. I had every intentions of going back, but then life took a course. I moved up here to Oregon and did end up going through business school and getting a trade degree in accounting, and then met my now husband. Things just fast-tracked from there. He still, to this day, we're almost 22 years together, and still to this day, he says we're still on our very first date. We've been kind of inseparable since. And he'll tell you that story. That's how he's claimed our relationship. And I'm telling you, God just took the wheel, because I grew up with the belief that I couldn't have children. That's what my mom had told me, because I was a premature baby. I had a lot of complications. So my mom led me to believe that there was a good chance I couldn't have children growing up. So ironically, when I knew that David and I were the ones, I started testing to see if I could even get pregnant. That didn't last very long. I got pregnant. So then, of course, my husband and I solidified our union and created a family. So we had a boy and a girl for 4 amazing years, almost 6, actually, because it was about 6 years when we decided to have Marshall. Very planned out. Brought him into this world, very normal pregnancy. We had a very normal first year of his life, meeting all of his milestones. Marshall was 6 months old, and I found out I was pregnant with the 4th. Wasn't planning on it, but oops, there we are. And all about that same time, I was asked by the state in which we live in, Child Services, to relative foster my nephew. And he was only 18 months old. So we went from a 4-member family to a 5-member family, and within 10 months, a 6-member family. We used to call ourselves a Fantastic Four, and then it increased by 3 within a short period of time. And then I found out I was pregnant with Michael. Probably when Marshall was about 12 months of age, his milestones just started kind of slowing down, and I knew something wasn't right. And of course, I'm still pregnant with Michael. So of course, we started going to the pediatrician, have testing, and he's like, "You're right, something's wrong here." And he literally went from almost walking to crawling, and then eventually not even crawling. Mark was tentatively diagnosed with MLD, metachromatic leukodystrophy. So then we were sent to a geneticist and finally got a diagnosis that he had Krabbe's disease. And then at that point, that was October of 2010, because Michael was born September 2010. And the very weekend that Michael was born, it was also Marshall's MRI. They were scheduled months out, but we were able to get one sooner than later. And so I actually asked my OBGYN to deliver Michael early. And since he had delivered Marshall prior, and I've never had a risk pregnancy and so on, he agreed to do so because he understood the circumstances. Because I didn't want to miss Marshall's MRI. So I literally had Michael within 24 hours and I was out. And so I had an infant newborn baby in tow, breastfeeding, and then we had Marshall's MRI. And it was funny because I remember sitting, that's one of the milestones or moments in my life where we were sitting in the lobby waiting for Marshall's MRI, and of course he had to be sedated. There was another family, and this woman and all of her children, they were all foster children, and they were all medically fragile children. And she was telling me how she these children have MRIs on a regular basis, and she has multiple of them. And I remember saying, I don't know how this woman does it. I couldn't do it. I just multiple children. I just couldn't. And then went to genetic testing. And then on November 19th of 2010, Marshall was diagnosed with Krabbe disease. I remember the doctor telling us we were the only case in Oregon that he had ever known of. And of course, I took that at face value, not that it meant anything to me at the moment, because all I knew is that my son was dying. And I was helpless, and there was nothing I could do. And then they highly encouraged that I get Michael tested, my newborn. And then, of course, we were scared for our other children because we knew nothing about Krabbe and onsets and so on and so forth. So we were on a roller coaster and had no idea where it was taking us. So moving forward, a month later, exactly. So Marshall was diagnosed 11/19, and then of 2010, Marshall, and then Michael received his diagnosis on December 19th, 2010. And I remember that day so clearly. I went to go get the kids from school, and I remember looking out of my kitchen window, and it was very cloudy, very gloomy, as it is in the States most of the time. Our geneticist had called. He says, look, I normally wouldn't do this over the phone, but I'm getting ready to go, and I'm leaving for the holidays, and I want you to have this information. Michael's test results came back, and he tested positive for Krabbe disease. And I remember I don't even remember the rest of that phone conversation. I remember just kind of my body collapsing. Because now I have multiple children that are medically fragile. And about that same time, my husband arrived with our children, our two oldest, and I just saw him very slowly walk across the kitchen window into the front door. And of course, I quickly pulled him to the side, and I went to the garage, and we went to the garage. And I remember telling him, I'm like, the geneticist called, and he confirmed that Michael has Krabbe disease. And all I remember is falling to the floor, literally falling to the floor. I had just lost myself. One of the hardest moments is getting a second diagnosis that you have a child dying. I feel like there's a lot of D-days in my life, is what I call them. Diagnosis day, death day. So now that Michael and Marshall both have Krabbe disease, I just start doing an enormous amount of research online. And all the while, Marshall's regressing in milestones. He's getting to where he won't feed anymore, and I'm just terrified. We had an appointment scheduled for his YouTube just before Thanksgiving or just right after Thanksgiving, and I was afraid he wasn't going to make it because it was just getting worse and worse and worse. He did make it to his YouTube surgery. He healed well and stuff. However, he came out with nerve pain, and now knowing what I know, I'm certain that during the surgery, he had some disease progression for a lot of different reasons. Through this entire process, from the beginning of everything, I remember crying in the shower because I knew that's where I could cry and just really cry. And I remember praying in the shower a lot. I go to church on a regular basis. During our journey, our roller coaster ride with the boys, I knew hands down with all my heart and soul that I was right. I was right where God wanted me to be. And I knew I just knew that that's where I needed to be, with my children and my family, and being the vessel for these two boys. I just knew. And it was interesting because if I look back at my life and the things that have happened in my life, there are moments and incidences and experiences that led me to be able to travel in this journey and be who I was supposed to be, or who I am. It was things like that that solidified and made my faith stronger, because I could see how things played out in my life that prepared me for these moments. Prime example, when my husband and I were house hunting, we decided to put a house on an offer, and literally by the next day it was ours. I mean, it just streamlined, and I honestly believe that was an opportunity. That was a moment. That was a time where God had help. Like, God had his hand in things, because it was just smooth sailing. It streamlined. It was just like butter. It just flowed. It happened. And then once we got all moved in and settled in, a few months later, I seen some missionaries walking down the street, and I'm like, all right, our family is formed here. We have our family. We're settled. We're stable. We need to get active. We need to get active again. And everybody needs to, be Christ-like. So we started being active in our church, and now I know why. Now I know why that was so important. Not only for our souls and for our growth as human beings and for our spirits, but I do believe that God had a hand in building my army to help me, to support me through the journey with Michael and Marshall. He gave me the tools I needed to get through Marshall and Michael's Krabbe disease. Hands down, I believe this with all my heart. And Marshall started the journey with Krabbe disease, and Marshall was regressing. Keep in mind, I was a mom of 4, actually 5, because I was fostering. And I was breastfeeding an infant while I still had a 13, 14-month-old baby that was regressing into an infant, back into an infant. I really leaned on my church, and I had women coming into my home while I was breastfeeding one or caring for the other, and they were taking care of the other one. I give that up to God. He had a hand in it. He had to have. He helped build an army for me. Another significant time where I felt all my guardian angels, my God, God was there for me. I remember Michael had already started transplant. We were trading shifts at the hospital. We wouldn't leave Michael's bedside. I had the weekends because he worked on the weekends. So he was home on the weekends, and I was up at the hospital on the weekends with Michael, and our trading days were Thursdays. And I remember Michael had fallen asleep, so I went downstairs and got me a drink and had a new scenery, because looking in a hospital room in a fishbowl is what my husband calls it, because you only get a little bit of glass to look out of. I remember looking through a summer magazine because my kids were going to be out of school and I needed to do something with them. So I was looking through a camp book. Again, keep in mind, through all of this, I'm praying to God every day, multiple times a day. Just give me the strength, give me a sign, let me know we're all on the right path, that we're doing the right thing, that my children, my boys that Michael's gonna survive his transplant, that Marshall's gonna have very little suffering, that my children, my normal children that aren't affected are gonna have a very normal life, and they won't resent their mom, or they won't feel like their mom is playing favoritism between sick children and normal children. So I'm praying for all of this, right? I remember looking through this magazine, this catalog for camp. Oddly, I'm not a poem or quote type person, but this picture of the dog tags caught my eye. And the reason why the dog tags caught my eye is because my husband is a retired veteran, Army National Guard, and served 23 years, and he retired because of Marshall's illnesses. He was going to do another 2 or 3 years for 25 years, and he decided to retire because, caring for medically fragile children is a full-time job. So he retired earlier than expected or planned. So the dog tags had caught my eye, and I remember so clearly the dog tags said on them, "I am not afraid. I was born to do this." And that was the answer to my prayer. I knew that regardless of the outcome, everything was going to be okay. And in that moment, that is when I released all my fears to God. I gave him up. During all this time frame, Michael had gotten really sick from his transplant, the chemotherapy. And there were several times we thought he wasn't going to make it. And I remember him being in a hospital bed with so many wires coming in and out of him. And I'm like, never in my life would I ever thought a mother would be praying to God to take their child home, to just surrender him from his pain and just take him. I didn't admit that for a very long time either, because a lot of people are just like, why would a mother ever want that for their child? But why would a mother ever want their child to suffer? I prayed, Lord, if he's not meant to be here, don't let him suffer any longer. Take him now. Just take it. And that was my prayer. And then, of course, so I can't remember if it was before or after I saw those dog tags. And I felt like it was more for Marshall than Michael. And still to this day, I honestly believe Marshall was here to save Michael's life. And I don't know how much truth that is, but I tend to believe it. I kind of feel like that was the case. We would take Marshall to see Michael in the hospital on occasion. Now, keep in mind, crabby children don't move very often. And we would always put Marshall in the bed with Michael. And by the good graces of God, Marshall would move his arm to get as close to Michael as possible. That was another gift from God to let us know that we were still all in the right moment. We were still all on the right path, and God is divine. He is here to support us and guide us through these journeys. Marshall's home regressing with Krabbe disease, and Michael's in a hospital fighting for his life with Krabbe disease. And my husband and I, are crossing paths, and we're making sure one of us is home with Marshall as often as we possibly can, as well as Michael in the hospital as often as we can. Another moment that I discovered God had his hand in our plan, my mother-in-law, she spent 2 years trying to decide when she was going to retire from her place of employment. And literally the very month Marshall started showing symptoms of his disease, she retired. And this woman, without even being asked, stepped up and became all of my children's primary care provider. She practically lived in my house Monday through Friday from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. for an amazing 6 years. That woman was my saint. And hands down, God brought her to me. And so my children were never without a mother figure, whether they got me part-time or full-time, or got grandma part-time or full-time. And still to this day, that woman, I love her with all my heart, and she has the utmost respect for me ever. And I thank God every day for her. God really knows what he's doing when he puts people in your life. So, of course, Michael is an amazing 11 years old now. He was diagnosed at 2 months of age with Krabbe disease and transplanted at 4 months of age in our home state here in Oregon. Standard transplant from what we know of. And it was, in summary, his transplant was very successful. He grafted very quickly, all the way, I believe it was 96%, and grafted with very little to no graft versus host disease. But of course, the chemotherapy being as harsh on your body as you can imagine, he literally got every single side effect of it. And that's an underestimate of it all. His organs were failing, and we just didn't know. We were scared. We didn't know if our boy was going to live 1 hour to the next. And I remember they had him on a ventilator, and he was on it for a good 3 months in PICU, and he was hooked up to all kinds of wires. He had, had dialysis on a regular basis, and so we had these machines helping him do what his body couldn't do. We were holding on by prayer. Let me tell you, we were holding on by prayer. In regards to Michael's journey, of course, what was supposed to be 55-day stay in a traditional transplant that was successful with very little side effects ended up being 200 days. And I remember reaching out to a Krabbe family that I met at the very first symposium that I went to. And I remember going to the very first symposium, and I needed to know two things. But I didn't have the courage to ask anyone because I wanted to know what a transplanted child looked like, because I literally had just left Michael at the hospital, and I didn't know what his life was going to look like. I didn't know if he was going to be disabled. I just didn't know. And I needed to know how my son was going to die. I needed to know how Marshall was going to die, because I didn't want him to suffer in any way, shape, or form. But I didn't have the heart to ask a mother or anyone, how did your child die? So at the symposium, I remember two families just very openly, willingly shared their stories. And I remember seeing Zoe Moore just run like the wind. And she brought so much hope to me. And I was like, okay, all right, we're going to do this. Michael's going to do this. And then there was the Garcia family, and the mother very openly, without me even asking, just started sharing her story of when her daughter passed away. And it was such a beautiful story. It was just so beautiful. The way that she told it and the way that they loved her in the last few hours of her life. I will never forget her sharing that story with me. And that was my sign. I was okay. I didn't know how Mark was going to go, but I had reasons to believe he wasn't going to be in a lot of things. And I prayed daily for it. So, and in fact, it's probably the only thing I ever asked God for. And I remember praying often to him, Lord, I've never asked for anything. And I've taken on this challenge, so I feel like I'm entitled. If my son came into my arms into this earth, I want him to be in my arms when he goes out. And it's the only thing I demanded and prayed for. Marshall passed away while I was 4 hours away at a basketball championship on March 6th of 2016, I think. I feel like I don't remember dates anymore. I lost my son. My husband said that he was gone. And I'm like, what do you mean gone? He's like, I'm at the ER and Marshall passed. Michael had a transplant at 4 months of age, and now Michael's 11 years old, almost 12 in September. And while his transplant season was very dramatic and emotional and hard for everybody, and we thought he was going to die, God gave us a blessing, and he recovered. He slowly healed, came home from the hospital after 200 days, and we started rehabilitation, and that was about a year-long process. He learned to walk again, eat again, talk again. And we had Marshall at home, we had Michael at home, we had our family at home, finally all under the same roof, and we were learning to live in a new chapter and learning how to navigate Marshall through his disease and care for him in the best possible way. And then we had Michael rehabilitating him from his transplant. Years are passing, and Michael's thriving. In March of 2016, Marshall obviously passed away. But we have, Michael is now 11 years old. He plays soccer yearly. He's played basketball. He really is, looking at him, you'd never know that he has Krabbe's disease. You'd never know he had a transplant. But he loves telling his story. He was recently featured in a fundraiser at our local children's hospital as a Nike designer, designed his own shoes that I'm sure you can find online if you just Google it. And he's thriving in every best possible way. He has no signs of Krabbe's disease. He has very little side effects from the chemotherapy. He's graduating from grade school this year, going on to middle school. He loves playing soccer. He loves riding his bike. He loves hanging out with friends. He wants to grow up and be a pilot, or maybe even an astronaut, or even a social media influencer. He's quite the entrepreneur. Last summer he had a lemonade stand, and that has grown into his own lawn mowing business. He has about 4 to 6 clients, and he rotates them. And now he's looking for the next best thing in entrepreneurship. And so he's just a little spitfire, is what we call him. And I honestly believe he lives life for two. Michael and Marshall, my M&M. He's doing really good. Was I ever mad at God? I probably had moments, but I surrendered them because there were moments, there was signs, there was prayers that were answered. And my faith in all of that, because of all of the signs, because all of it just was a confirmation, a validation that God was here to be by my side, to guide me through the journey, to offer me the tools that I needed to get through them. So, was there moments? Sure. One of the very first questions I'll ask him is, why didn't I get to see him leave? Why couldn't he have left in my arms? While that's still bittersweet and that's all, that's still like a little issue for me, I also at the same time just release it, because I don't think I was ever meant to be there. I think my husband was meant to be there. I think my husband needed to be there. My family members have handled this journey very differently. It's all been different for each one of them. The younger ones are resilient, so I don't see a lot of behavior or different ways that they've coped with it or not. And then my oldest daughter, that probably affected her the most. Behaviors manifested from it. And, as a mom, you can only hope that everything turns out for the best, and now my daughter is, 21 years old, and I think she's doing an amazing job adulting, and she's doing the very best that she can. And she knows that she has me for support. And I remind her often to lean into her scriptures and her prayer and her faith in Jesus Christ and our God Almighty. Still to this day, my faith is very strong. I know God has a hand in everything. There's only moments that I might be mad, but then I'm reminded the blessings that came from all of this, the lessons that came from all of this. And I would do it all over again, through all the hardship, through all the tears, through all the crying, because all of the blessings and the love outweigh the hardship, even though the hardship was so hard, just so unbearable at times. Because of my faith, because of my belief, I know I was right where I was meant to be, where I was supposed to be, as a mom, as a wife, as a soul. And I know that's where God planted me. And would I do it all over again for my Savior and my Lord? Absolutely. Because I was asked to. My husband kind of lost his way in finding faith and serenity in Christ and God, and I see his struggles. Whereas I've been the complete opposite. I found greater strength in my faith and my Savior and my Almighty, the Almighty. And I can't imagine life without it. I think I would struggle more so than I do now. I think life would be harder without my faith and my support system. Those who are struggling with affected children, the loss there, and then having to deal with grief after, it's a whole new grief. It's a whole new grief. It's a different kind of grief. And your support system, your family, your friends, the more you open up to them and let them in, those are tools that God has given you to navigate, to help you navigate the struggles of everything that you have to endure. And in all honesty, the more I surrendered into my faith and my belief and my love for Jesus and God, the more I found peace and confirmation that I was where I needed to be, that everybody is meant to be here for one reason or another. And I received a lot of confirmations and validations. I remember one example, that I mentioned earlier, finding the dog tag that said, "I am not afraid. I was born to do this." Confirmation that Marshall was, whether I understood it or not, some type of warrior of God. One of God's, we're all members of God's army, but he had a greater purpose than I could even understand. And I actually got a little cocky about it in my head, thinking, I'm a vessel, I'm a mother of one of God's warrior, because he's here on earth protecting his Michael, living gracefully through this disease, and he accepted this mission. He accepted this mission. But no questions asked. His God asked him, I can't promise you everything. It's not going to be the greatest time, but I need you to do this. This is the lesson you need to learn. I have these conversations in my head. This is the lesson you need to learn. Do you accept? And this soul, this Marshall soul, accepted this mission that God had given him. And that's how I see things. And that's where I find my peace. That's where I find my comfort. Now, don't get me wrong. Are there moments where I'm vulnerable and I'm human, and I have feelings and I have emotions, and I miss my son. So yes, are there moments where I can't always believe that? I think I always believe it, but I have the moments where I just have to be a mom for a minute and remind myself how much I love my son and how much I miss my son and how much I wish I could hold him and love him. But another thing that I hang on to, and the thing that gives me hope, is knowing that one day I will be reunited with him and I will continue to love him. And I am so thankful to God for that. So I truly hope anyone listening to this message, whether you're a mom or a grandma or a dad, and you have an affected child of any disease, any cancer, any debilitating illness, I hope that you find your strength, that you can lean into it, that you have a better understanding, and that you learn to live with it as best as you possibly can, and live more in the happy moments than the sad moments. But don't forget the sad moments, because those are the ones that allow you to release and love, and allow the community to support you, allow family to support you, because that really is a tool that God gives you, and you will thrive in it if you allow it. And there's going to be bad times. There's going to be people who you want to be in your life and they're not, and some that'll step up to the plate and want everything that they can offer. And you don't have time to waste, to be negative, to dwell on the negativity. There's so much peace in the positive. And if you can get there, if you can find it in prayer, find it in Christian music, find it feeding the ducks. I've learned I love feeding the ducks. Take bread and feed the ducks. Listen to the water. Listen to nature. These are all tools that God gives us to help us navigate the struggles and the good and the bad and the sad and all the love in the world. And I encourage you to find it. Find the beauty in it all, because it's there. And when you find it, you see all the beauty more than you see the ugly. And I just pray that you find it, because it's there.
Do you believe that you are right where you're meant to be? Do you trust that God's hand is in the midst of every detail of your life? He won't leave you. He hears you. He sees you. He loves you. He will meet you right where you are, wherever you are. Thank you so much for being here. I hope that Tammy's story encourages you to share your own story. You matter. Your life matters. And your story can make an impact that matters for eternity. Make a difference today for someone who is fighting for their tomorrow.